Hello, today we are going to install macOS Big Sur 11 for AMD 64 in QEMU. So I have the host machine, which is Ubuntu 2304, a Linux operating system, AMD 64, that has QEMU KVM Word Manager. I'm searching on the internet for QEMU macOS, and I get sent to the github.com/holia/osx-kvm. So it has support for new macOS operating systems, and it's the first time that I could get a macOS operating system virtual machine inside QEMU running with 0 bugs. I did not have to restart the machine or anything, so everything has worked as expected. It's a virtual machine, it doesn't have access to additional hardware resources, but it gets the job done. And here is the proof. So this is the macOS running on QEMU, resolution 1080p. Okay, and the speed is acceptable. The only thing that's a bit annoying is some operations take 1 extra second, such as minimizing windows. So there's a Finder, there's applications. Everything works as expected. System preferences. Safari, the web browser, works okay. Is snappy. Firefox works okay. Let's see YouTube performance. Looks okay, is snappy. Okay, so let's see how we got here. We're going to stop the current virtual machine. And go through the procedure. So github.com/kholia/osx-kvm. So it says a modern Linux distribution. I have Ubuntu 2304, which is newer than 2204. I have the needed version of QEMU. I have AMD SVM. I have AVX2. Modern AMD Ryzen processors work just fine, which is what I have. And then we should start doing. So let's install these packages. Says that there's no such thing as QEMU. Okay, so it says that there's no package QEMU, and indeed there's no such thing. So let's remove QEMU from the list. And run a command line that will install the rest of the deb packages. Okay, clone this repository on your QEMU system. So it's indeed recommended that you follow the instructions, which means that you git clone this git repository in your home directory, so in tilde. Let's actually do what it says in here. So So it does recursive in order to download git submodules, and depth1 to not download the history, so it's faster. Okay, so it seems to take a while. There's a submodule git repository OC binary data, which sounds like some pre-built images, which will take some time to download. And I'm not sure why, but the speed for downloading from GitHub is really slow in this second, so I'll be back in a second. Okay, so it finished downloading the two Git repositories, one being a submodule of the other. The next thing to do is to enable this feature for KVM, which is ignore MSRS. Let's run it as it is. Okay, so let's see if we have KVM. So KVM and KVM AMD are both loaded in the current running Linux kernel. So these are Linux kernel mode modules. And then let's see this thing. It should say uppercase Y, which it does. Okay. We should make this change permanent for AMD boxes only, which is this thing. Let's see what this does. So there's a kvm.am_amd.conf in this current directory. Okay, which says ignore MSRS1, which is what we already did. Report ignored MSRS0 and KVM AMD nested. Okay, so we should run this command. That's exactly what I have right now. Okay, then it says that my current user, which is $ parenthesis who am I, should be added to some Linux user groups, KVM, libvirt, and input. Let's do that. Okay, then it requires that I log out of my Linux desktop or I reboot the machine in order to make these changes, such as my current Linux user is member of these three user groups, KVM, libvirt, libinput, and input. Then we can confirm using the command line groups. So libvirt, input, and KVM. Okay. Then it says that we need to fetch the macOS installer. Let's actually run this thing. And the important decision here is what type of macOS operating system do I want. So it says that 4 Big Sur 11 is recommended, and that's what I have used with great success. And also some of the software that I wanted to install actually required at least macOS Big Sur. So that was also something that goes for us using macOS Big Sur. So let's go 4. It downloads two files, base image, base system.dmg. So this is, I don't know, probably operating system content delivery network.apple.com. HTTP, not HTTPS. It downloads 600 megabytes. We'll pause a bit and then we'll be back. Says modern NVIDIA GPUs are supported. I do not have such a thing. I'm on this thing, AMD Ryzen 5 7750GE, which has integrated AMD GPU. After I get the base system.dmg, I need to convert that to base system.img. Then I'm going to create a QEMU QCOW hard disk. So it's 1/3 already downloaded, the file base system.dmg. So let me pause for a second. Okay, so it says downloaded complete. So now we have this file locally, base system.chunklist and base system.dmg. Let's convert it to an img file. Okay, so archive successfully decompressed as base system.img. So base system is 600 megabytes and base system img is 2 gigabytes. Okay, let's create a img for the QEMU virtual machine. I'm using a fast NVMe. Am I ready to install macOS? So there's just one script that we care, which is OpenCore boot sh. And let's try our luck and edit this file right off the gate. I'm going to make a backup of the file. And then I'm going to edit it. Okay. What I want to do in here is to allocate more RAM. Let's make it 10 gigabytes. One CPU socket, CPU cores make that 4, and threads make it 8, so hyper-threading. Because the CPU is hard-coded to Penryn, which is Core 2 Quad Intel. So let's hope that this modification of the file does not affect the way the operating system installs. It should still install successfully and without any bugs. And now we need to run the file. Okay. If I do not touch the machine, it's better, because inside of the bootloader it will boot on the correct partition or on the correct UEFI option. So right now it will boot automatically on the first option, which is macOS base system, which is what's selected in here and shown with this arrow after a timeout. We can make this faster by pressing enter. So we're inside the bootloader in here. we need to press Ctrl-Alt-G to release the grab, Ctrl-Alt-G. But once the operating system starts, it will recognize probably the USB tablet. So right now, so we can move the mouse in and out QEMU without needing to press Ctrl-G to exit. Okay, so this is the macOS kernel was loaded and has started. We saw the first steps in the initialization sequence of the kernel, and now the rest of the macOS operating system starts. Okay, so this is the recovery, and in here, so this is actually an application named recovery, has 4 other secondary options, so it runs other applications. We'll need to select disk utility, either double click or select and then continue. So let's go double click. So disk utility will show 3 disks. Once some of these are already formatted, such as this one, we can see how much is used, how much is free. This is also formatted. And then there's a huge one, 180 gigabytes, 138 gigabytes. And it has no partitions, it's not formatted, and it says uninitialized. Whereas the rest, it says GPT, macOS extended, etc. So we need to select the one that's 138 gigabytes because that's the size that we have told QEMU to use. In here, QEMU minus EMG create 128 gigabytes. And also because it's uninitialized and has no partitions, we go erase. And let's read what it says. So it says use the disk utility tool to partition and format the virtual disk attached to the macOS VM, which is what we're doing. Go ahead and install macOS. So after we partition, we're using disk utility, we can reinstall the macOS operating system. And the tip says use a non-APFS file system. What's a non-APFS file system? It's this one, macOS extended journal. Linux operating systems are by default case sensitive, but then at least KDE has some issues with case sensitive macOS file systems, so we'll use the one that's case insensitive. Okay, so the only macOS possible option that's not APFS, because these two are Microsoft style. So this one. We can name this anything, but not untitled, because we'll hate that name. Let's go with this. GUID partition map means GPT. GUID partition table. There's the other option known from Windows, which is MBR. And we'll keep GPT if that's supported. Next option, erase. It formats, so it creates the partition table GPT, and then it has formatted, so created a partition that's macOS extended journal. Okay, and back to it. So we can now see in here partition, so says used space 200 megabytes, free space 137 gigabytes. Okay, disk 0 S2. Okay, so that was all for disk utility. We just need to format the unformatted virtual machine hard disk. Okay, we can close this thing. And now the next option is reinstall macOS Big Sur. We can double click. Says continue. License agreement. I agree. I want to install in the big space, which is the 138 gigabytes NVMe virtual machine SSD. Continue. And it says that copying from the macOS installation media to the virtual hard disk will take 2 hours. And it actually takes around 45 minutes on my machine. So we'll be back once we get further. So right now it decreased the estimation to 54 minutes, which is about correct. Okay, and while the installer is running, let's see what other options do we have in here. So we have window and installer log. So let's actually have the installer log visible. Use the bottom of the screen for that. Hide the QEMU main menu, which is from the QEMU main menu. View, show menu bar. We uncheck this thing. And we actually select in here show all logs such that we can see real-time progress. So this is what's taking a ton of time. Downloading a 12 gigabytes install assistant.pkg file from Apple. Software CDN, content delivery network, install assistant.pkg, which is probably a installer wizard. So I'll be back after this package finishes installing, and you might even get that you cannot download this package because of a networking issue or something. The download can break, and in that case you need to restart the installation and again enable installer logs, look at the logs and see what's actually doing. Okay, since I'm on a PC style hardware, I have a normal mouse with a scroll wheel and the left mouse button, right mouse button. The scroll wheel works in the wrong direction. This is a setting that will change in the preferences in the settings of macOS, but after we finish installing the operating system. For now, we need to remember that we need to scroll in the not normal direction if you want to actually scroll inside of this installer log, for instance. So scroll down to go up. Okay. This is config D. So for 4 minutes, it kept downloading. So it's 12 gigabytes to download. We can actually see the progress of download by looking inside the host machine. So it says that it's downloading with 17 megabytes per second sometimes. So it's totally still downloading the 12 gigabytes image because we can see copious amounts of download speed used by QEMU. So I waited until the 12 gigabytes file was downloaded correctly. I could see when it stopped being downloaded in here. After a while, for minutes and minutes, QEMU system was no longer downloading. And then after a while I pressed cancel because nothing really actually happened inside of the installer after downloading that file. And now I'm back to the recovery application with 4 options, and I'm going to choose reinstall macOS Big Sur again. Go continue, window installer log, agree, 138, continue. So the first time it wasn't lucky. The second time maybe is better. I'll be back once I actually finish installing, or once I get further to the next installer page after this one. So this time it went way better because we can see where it started downloading the package, and then after a while it logged again. So the same process, OS installer setup daemon with process ID 436. This time, after it stopped downloading from the internet, it logged the next line which says finished extracting succeeded. So what I would suggest, if this line is shown in the logs, so it starts downloading, you can see the download speed. Once the download speed goes to 0 and you think that enough bytes have been downloaded for these 12 gigabytes, you wait. If it says in under, I don't know, 2 minutes that it finished extracting, otherwise you just restart the reinstall macOS process. So you don't wait for tens of minutes for absolutely no gain. Okay. The same thing in here, it pre-selects in the bootloader one of the options, macOS installer. So don't change anything. Eventually, if you do not want to wait, enter QEMU. Now it grabs the, okay, and then just press enter. So don't change the selection. You can hurry up the process by pressing enter. Otherwise, after the timeout occurs, the correct option will be booted into. Okay, so it has started macOS. There's a bit of text being shown, how the kernel boots, and then the rest of the installer shows this graphical splash screen. Okay, it says about 29 minutes remaining. And while it's doing that, let's read further. So we used this utility. We started installation of the macOS operating system. I'm using the correct file system, which is not non-APFS. And then, as a last step, we could start the virtual machine either by using this shell script, or we can integrate this virtual machine into Virt Manager. These are the steps to make the virtual machine available to Virt Manager. I did not manage to make it work. Maybe it will this time, we'll see. But if it does not work, we cannot manage the virtual machine using Virt Manager, no problem. We always have the shell script. Okay. Then it says that you have a virtual machine running macOS. What's missing? There's no sound. So you can watch YouTube videos, but you cannot hear the sound there. The workaround is to use a USB, very cheap USB sound card, a $2 one, for instance, and you can pass through that. So there's notes. Let's look at the notes. You might have App Store problems if your network interface card is not a default one, not EN0, but for instance, something else, which is not the case. I'm not using Ventura. I do not want to change the resolution. 1080p is okay. I do not want to use GPU pass-through, which is a very advanced topic. The developers of the solution often use USB pass-through for at least the sound device, so I'm not going to do that. And not going to use Synergy for a virtual KVM mouse keyboard. Okay, and then the rest of the notes are about how to optimize the macOS virtual machine such that it's faster. So what I did use is, so in here it says how they do it. They change various settings inside of the settings application, and they use the defaults command line application. Defaults read can export to a text file all of the current settings in the operating system. And then you go to the settings app, you change something, and then you export all of the settings again as text. And then you look at what changed between the two text files, the one before you did the setting and the one after you did the setting. Okay, so I did disable Spotlight. Heavily speeds up virtual machines. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I did this thing. Then performance mode for server applications. I did this thing. This. I did not change anything related to wallpapers, password screens, login screen. There's also these settings about reducing motion and transparency. I disabled updates from the settings application. And that's it. Okay, so now we're at the step where we're still installing macOS, and it's going to take at least 20 minutes more. So I'll be back. Okay, so the installer is left in this state where it says that less than a minute remains for at least 10 minutes. So I'm going to restart the virtual machine. What other option do I have? Control Alt M. Machine reset. Okay, so now the bootloader is different. I'm not sure what I should select in here. It has added a third option, which is recovery, or not. Let's go with the option that's default one. Maybe we're lucky and it installed correctly to the hard disk. If not, we'll need to install it again a third time. I'll be back once this progress finishes. Okay. It rebooted. We're back to the same bootloader. So I'm thinking now maybe we can boot on the first option, a macOS base system. I'll be back once it boots into macOS, so past all of the installers. Oh, we're back to recovery. What is this? Yeah, back to step one. So I'll be back once I am past the installation and I'm into the first boot from the hard disk. So now it shows a different list of bootloader options. I have a new option that was not available previously, which is 138 GB, and which is now selected as the default value. So it will boot after a timeout from the virtual hard disk. I would much rather see the verbose boot than the graphical user interface boot progress bar. Okay, and now we're at the first run wizard where I select my location and create a user. So let's see how this works. Continue. So I've selected the English US. No accessibility. Data and privacy. No migration, not now. And I'm not going to use Apple ID. Skip creating an Apple ID. License terms. Agree. And here I create my user, my local macOS user. Okay. Username. Continue. Enable location services, not. Yay. New York. Don't share. Screen time. Set up later. No Siri. Choose your look. Okay, it says it could not identify the keyboard. So it asks, there's a left hand side shift key. What's the key to the right of that key? So I'm using a QWERTY standard English US keyboard. So in my case, that's lowercase z. And the right hand side of the keyboard, there's a shift key, and what's on the left of that button, so there's slash. Okay, it has identified the keyboard correctly. I need to hide the menu bar. So not everything is visible in here because the resolution of QEMU is 1080p and the resolution on my monitor is 1080p. So just a second, let me select to just capture the interior of the QEMU window. Okay, so now I'm using the QEMU virtual machine window. I'm inside it. I'm recording just what's inside this QEMU window. The resolution is fine by me, 1080p inside of the macOS virtual machine. And that's about it. I managed to install macOS correctly on QEMU using KVM on a Linux operating system. So the next thing that I want to do is to do some speed improvements to the virtual machine, and then I'm going to create a snapshot of the directory where I install the virtual machine. So that's the directory where I git cloned the GitHub repository. So that's tilde in my home directory. And the directory is called osx-kvm, all uppercase. So osx-kvm, I'm going to copy this directory, make a backup such that if something goes wrong to the virtual machine, I can always go back to a state where macOS Big Sur 11 is installed correctly. I have created my user. I have run the first run wizard for my user, so I can always go back to whatever you see now on the screen. Okay, so it says automatically keep my Mac up to date, advanced, don't check for updates, asks for password. Okay, and now theoretically it will not auto update. I do not want to make the jump to Ventura because that's not the recommended macOS version for OS X-KVM. So I'm going to stay with Big Sur 11 for a while. Okay, and for that, so if you remain on macOS Big Sur, do not upgrade to macOS Ventura, you can install an update for Safari, which is something that I'm not going to do right now. Okay, so I did the what's required for not having the operating system automatically update. Then I'm going to do the other settings that I usually do. First of all, I don't see the mouse, it's way too small, so let's go with that. Accessibility. Cursor size, this thing. I make it bigger. Okay, and now let's see which of the improvements that are suggested I should apply. For that I need to, let's first install Firefox and see how that works. Firefox, get, download, allow. Okay, finished downloading inside of the downloads directory. Open in Finder, it's a DMG, a disk image. Okay, I should drag to the applications folder directory. Okay, then I should unmount. Right click and eject. Okay, applications, Firefox, options, where are you? Options, keep in dock. Let's remove some of the apps that I do not want in the dock. Skip this step. Import browser data skip. Hop, skip. Start browsing. Let's go straight to private mode. Let's do a bit of customization. Now this, that, and that, and never show bookmarks. Okay, let's search for macOS QEMU. And the first GitHub repo that's suggested, which is KHOLIA OS X KVM. Okay. The scroll of the mouse is wrong. This thing. Scroll direction natural. And that's it. Now the scroll wheel works correctly. Okay. So the speed is really good because the virtual machine uses 10 gigabytes of RAM, uses 8 vCPUs, so 8 CPU cores, 8 CPU threads, like that. But additional speed optimizations can be done by looking at SIGCode's OS X optimizer. So let's do them, the ones that I done before and found useful. Disable spotlight. I need a terminal, which is in Finder, which is the default file manager in macOS. Then applications. Then the only directory in here, which is called utilities. Then terminal. I want this to be kept in dock. And I'm going to go paste. And says indexing disabled. Sounds okay. Boot args should say server perf mode 1. And it does not. So let's do that. Okay. And now we need to reboot the machine in order for the boot args to when the macOS kernel boots to use the new boot arguments. And I also went with these reduce motion and transparency settings. I already disabled updates. And that's about it. Additional settings that I would make, I would enable SSH servers, so maybe I can do some of the things by not using the QEMU graphical user interface console, but by just connecting to the virtual machine using an SSH client, so from the terminal. And then I would enable some remote desktop solution inside of macOS and connect using that to the macOS server, to the macOS machine. Where were those? So screen sharing. On. I need a VNC viewer. And then what's the remote login? Remote login lets users of other computers access this computer using SSH and SFTP. Yes. Allow full disk access for remote users. I'm not sure what that is. The computer name. Okay. So that's all of the minimorum settings in order to make this virtual machine as snappy and as fast as possible. Again, it requires a reboot in order for the setting for additional system resources for server applications, for background daemons. And other than that, everything seems okay, snappy enough to be used for testing software, for development, etc. Thank you.